Questions of Doom.
Hello, welcome back to another Questions of Doom. Now, in this series, I, as ever, attempt to answer questions that you send my way using the archaeosoup@gmail.com email address as displayed on the channel homepage or indeed at the end of this video. In answering these questions via video, I hope that the answers will be useful not only to the person who asks the question, but also other people out there in YouTube land. So today we have a comment or a question from Propreno, or as I shall call them, Propreno. And Propreno would like to know the following, or rather they said the following. I'm curious, Mr. Soup, do you know of any religious institutions contracting archaeologists? Maybe the Church of England, Vatican, or a Jewish organisation, or others. Have you had any dealings with these institutions personally? If so, could you describe the experience? Well, Mr. Propreno, or Mrs. Propreno, or Miss Propreno, yes, I am aware of such institutions, and this is only to be expected. After all, many belief systems deal with their dead in very particular ways, and therefore their institutions and organisations will be involved in the handling of the dead. And of course, wherever the dead go, so too must the archaeologists. So yes, archaeologists and religious institutions frequently meet. In Britain, obviously, yes, the Church of England has a big hand to play in terms of the way in which the dead are handled, and archaeologists often are called in to work closely with them. For example, I have once worked on an excavation where we had to locate the exact boundaries of a cemetery because it had been blown up by a bomb during the Second World War, and that experience was extremely positive. The vicar involved was not only curious but also actually helped us to smooth the whole thing over with local people who understandably were a little bit nervous that you might be digging up anti-maureen. So actually that was a very, very positive experience of working with a religious institution. Now, it's also worthwhile remembering actually that much archaeology, particularly in Britain, has its roots in people, often from religious backgrounds, going out and digging up things for a hobby. Vicars, for example, often went out and did excavations of Bronze Age burial mounds on the weekend. So in some ways, archaeology actually has some of its roots in these institutions anyway. Yes, the Vatican does have its own archaeological unit, and as you might expect, they are, after all, their own self-contained nation state. Now this, along with other institutions such as, say, the Hebrew University of Jerusalem, does garner a certain amount of cynicism from some. The perception of an agenda which will override all archaeological endeavours often leads archaeologists and others to assume that these institutions aren't necessarily doing archaeology properly or doing history justice. There's an agenda, there's a conspiracy behind it. And to a certain extent, some of this does hold water, or rather you can see why it goes on. For example, the archaeologists at the Vatican were bound to find St. Peter's remains underneath St. Peter's Basilica. So say some people, and so therefore there can be often some mistrust between these institutions and archaeologists. Another example recently was actually the finding of a Roman sword and the inscription of a menorah in a sewer near to the temple in Jerusalem, where archaeologists said that this was evidence of a Jewish resistance to Roman rule, and also someone being so struck by the beauty of the menorah as they passed by that they inscribed it and then threw away the inscription. But that raises all sorts of question marks for me. One of them is actually that the inscription didn't look like a 7-tiered candle. It looked more like maybe a 4 or 5-tiered candle, and possibly even like a rainbow. And also, why would you throw it away? So there is often the perception of the need to create a narrative, and therefore archaeology is used by some of these groups, or can be used. But as has already been pointed out by another wonderful YouTube user called Fidgaff, archaeology in, for example, the Middle East is getting much better. Israeli archaeologists looking for evidence of the great migration from Egypt have been very honest about the fact that they haven't actually found anything, or haven't found much. So often this perception of cynicism is misguided, or often overly cynical, as it were. And there are many groups who are now looking to improve archaeological practice to make it a little less biased. So as much as, yes, there are questions that can be asked of some of this research, I think it's unfair to label all archaeological institutions who are connected to religious institutions as being biased. It's also another experience actually that I've had or that I've known about rather, that I've been on the periphery of, was when there was an excavation just outside York of a Jewish cemetery, where the remains are thought to actually have come from essentially a massacre that took place in the town. And there was lots of, oh dear, we found evidence of the massacre, and even to this day actually the Jewish community in York is sparse at best because of it. But actually the community was really good. Representatives came up from councils based in London and elsewhere, and actually so long as the remains were treated with dignity, they had no problem with it. In fact, now the car park, actually there was a supermarket in the car park, when the car park went up, and there's a plaque on the wall thanking the council and the archaeologists involved for dealing with remains with dignity, and it's written in English and in Hebrew. So often, as I say, this can actually be a very positive experience with the Church of England, as I've definitely experienced, and also, for example, with the Jewish community, as I've definitely been a sort of a roundabout witness to. So these experiences and these interactions are necessary because both institutions, archaeology and religion and faith groups, deal with the remains of the dead. And really the only problem comes about when there is an overt agenda. And this can be anything from geopolitical, i.e. trying to prove the kingdom of David really existed as described in the Bible, or trying to show that your people have always lived in a certain area, for example with Native American archaeology or groups. It can even be as simple as Druids trying to definitely claim Stonehenge for themselves, and the way that archaeology can be affected or sometimes abused in that sense. But the same goes actually for archaeologists themselves. If you take certain archaeologists who believe in a multi-regional evolution of humanity, and they often will try and scupper research that says anything else. That, if the more that says that we, for the most part, come from Africa, and a relatively small group of people actually who came out of Africa, then some of these people will argue against that tooth and nail without actually looking at the evidence. So it's not so much, and I suspect that many people will want me to say, well, these institutions are just trying to get in the way. But it's not so much the institutions, actually. For the most part, they're very useful, very helpful, and actually a wonderful way of relating the archaeology that's found to the people who are living there now, making sure these people understand what we're doing. The problem comes when there is an agenda that's stubborn, and stubbornness has always been an issue, I think, with humans. So there you go. Thank you very much for the question, Propreno. It was a wonderful question, very well worth answering. Hopefully other people have found some of this interesting or useful. Feel free to comment below. Please, though, please, for the love of gods, whichever god you believe in, or don't believe in, please don't debate the merits of religion below. Just feel free to share your thoughts on the way that archaeology and faith groups or religions interact with one another. I'm sure no one really wants to hear yet another debate along those lines, but certainly along the lines of of your experiences. So help Propreno along, and let's have a bit of a discussion about this if you want to. Feel free. So until next time, thank you very much for watching.